Hello there, friends. Today we're talking about France. This is going to be the part one of our series of videos when we talk about France. So, as we talk about them, we're going to talk about a little bit about the geography. Um, it is one of the largest of Western European countries. Actually, it is the largest. It's got about 200,000 square miles, just about the size of Texas, maybe a little bit smaller. And I see a typo there. Westernmost country in the region, right? So as you look at the map, it's farthest west, the ones we're talking about. It borders Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, Monaco, Spain, and Andorra. Uh, Andorra being the little city state, more or less, there. Monaco being a city state here. Luxembourg being a very small country. Belgium, Switzerland, and of course Italy and Spain. Um, it's a pretty varied area, really. I should have thrown a geographical map up here, but we've got mountain ranges here bordering with Switzerland and Italy. We've got wide flat plains. We've got some great farmland in this area here. Just kind of get a little bit of everything: mountains, rivers, valleys. There's a pretty fertile agricultural land down south here. The growing season is quite a bit longer than some other places. And let's see, second most populous country in Europe. Now that includes all of Europe. It's got about 67 million people. 80% of those are living in cities. Obviously Paris is a very big city. You've got some other ones: Toulouse, Nice, Lyon, things like that. And you can tell by some of the names here, Strasbourg gets a very German name. So there's it's been a kind of a crossroads for a long time. So you get a little pretty big mix of cultures and ethnicities, I guess is a way to put it. It's a pretty big agricultural producer. It's really the biggest, mostly because of that growing season that I talked about. Um, it's a pretty big influencer as far as culture, fashion, cuisine. You think about Paris Fashion Week. That's something that happens in the spring and again in the fall. And there's plenty of famous um, name brands: Chanel, Saint Laurent, Dion, Gaultier. Lots of name brands that are coming from France. It is actually back to the agricultural producing. It is the only country in Europe to be able to export wheat. They make enough to export. Again, the southern France has the long growing season. That's a major reason why. Uh, One of the things we think about when we talk about France is wine. It is actually the biggest wine exporter in the world. It exports roughly $9.4 billion US of wine. Um, that is about 700. They don't actually consume the most in the world. They do consume a lot. They consume about 740,000 US gallons. Um, but the number one is actually the United States. I should say, consume about 396 gallons per person. I saw that stat and I'm a little bit dubious. That's a lot of wine. So I think there's something off there, but we are number one as far as wine consumption. Um, I don't know. I feel like I need to maybe check that one out. But France has a long history with wines and spirits in general. A lot of the wines we know of and the brands and the grapes and things that we know of are actually named after places in France that those grapes or those wines or spirits have been made. Champagne is there's an area called Champagne in France. I'm probably butchering the name. Burgundy, Bordeaux. There's even cognac. There's a place. So a lot of what we know of as far as wines and spirits have a French origin, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the geography, a little bit about kind of what they produce and economics and stuff, but talking a little bit about the history. So France was ruled by a monarch for about 1,000 years, starting in the 9th century, going up until the French Revolution in 1789. Uh, that revolution was kind of famous more because there's so many beheadings and executions, and the guillotine was kind of a new thing, and they made it a big spectacle and made it a big crowd, right? So roughly 40,000 people were executed. Most of them were commoners, actually, which is unknown to most people. That the reason for that is because the whole reign of terror, that's what they called this period of time in France, was designed to squash counter revolution. So if you started a revolution, you don't want other people countering that revolution with something of their own. Um, but obviously, a lot of aristocrats, the king Louis the 16th and his wife Marie Antoinette, were one of the more famous victims. But a large majority, I mean, there aren't that many, there aren't 40,000 kings and queens and dukes and whatnot in France. So a very large percentage were just common everyday people, shopkeepers, that kind of stuff. You've probably heard of Marie Antoinette. She is accredited with the famous line of "Let them eat cake." Um, it's pretty disingenuous statement to the poor people. In case you're wondering, this is Louis the 16th and this is Marie Antoinette. Um, the problem is that it's more likely that statement is accredited to a French queen about 100 years earlier, as Marie Antoinette was actually super generous with a lot of causes around France. They didn't like her. I mean, she came from Austria. They called her all sorts of bad names, the Austrian whore, that kind of stuff. Um, but she was pretty generous. But she was also like crazy rich and would, drive around town in her fancy carriage and whatnot. So it didn't really put her over well with the common people. Um, anyways, in 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowns himself the emperor, right? And he goes on to conquer most of Europe, all the way into Russia, things like that, over the next 11 years. In 1815, he was defeated at Waterloo, and then France reverted back to a monarchy, um, which is unfortunate. But Bonaparte actually, upon his um, arrest or his defeat, he actually um, was jailed at an island called St. Helena, which is way south off the coast of Africa. And he actually died there about 6 months after he was first put into prison. And he was buried there. So, kind of an interesting thing. But he didn't really want to. It was against his wishes. And um, in about 1840, he was moved to a tomb with other French military leaders. And this is actually his tomb right here. Yeah, so that ends our part one of France. And we'll